too bad in here, but a really warm, metaphorically, a warm welcome to our wonderful parish church, this building which we are celebrating this year, a millennium special year, 1,000 years of a church presence. And it is my joy and privilege to welcome you to this building, and it is such a delight that this building is being used in this way for History Week, for us to learn more things about what has happened in the past, the people that came into this place, the stories behind them, and hopefully legacy for generations to come. I know that we have quite a few people on the live stream, and so really warm welcome to you, and this will be recorded so people will be able to hopefully watch it if they weren't able to attend this evening. I'm not allowed to say any more because my husband Alistair would like to take over. So
terrific, great. Can we just turn that on? It is on. Great, thank you. I'm going to stand here, so hopefully people on the live stream can see me. So, as you may have spotted, but if you haven't, let me just say it once again. This week, we're especially celebrating the history of our village and the history of this church. And there are many people here who know a huge amount about that. And we could have chosen to have evenings focused on really ordinary things like who built it and which bits were built by which, but we've deliberately not done that. We've deliberately tried to find really expert people to tell us something we didn't necessarily know about something extraordinary in our parish church. And Matt, you are one such person. You're an expert coming to tell us about something extraordinary. So I didn't know, Livia didn't know when we came here, but we found out that the graffiti in this church is very special. We found it out because we came here one afternoon to find Matt and Lauren scurrying around, looking at these strange things on the church. And Lauren, who is on the live stream, hello Lauren, has spent 2 whole days telling our children at William Wesley, every single pupil has come here to learn about the graffiti in our church. Every single pupil over 2 days, thanks to Lauren. So we want to say thank you very much to Lauren. And now it's the adults' turn. And so we have Matt Champion here, who, as you've seen in the advertising, is an author on medieval graffiti. But what I didn't know until this evening, this is his main thing. So his day job is medieval graffiti, working in the past in academia, but now for English Heritage, National Trust, and excitingly for authorities in Siena in the autumn. It's a tough life, isn't it? Tough life. So Matt, we're really, really grateful for you to come along and tell us about the graffiti in our church. Thank you very much. Yeah, you can. Bear with me. Right, can you all hear me? Excellent. Well, you need to stand behind the lamp. Sorry. The live stream only points here, so I gradually wander off. I do have a bad habit of kind of waving my hands around as well. So anyway, first of all, thank you for that wonderful introduction. Most of it was correct, it's fine. And thank you for inviting me here. This is, as you already know, a very, very special church. It's a very special church architecturally. It's a very special church because of its monuments. It's a very special church because of its people. But for me, it's a very, very special church because of its graffiti. And it's not often you hear people say that. I love that church. It's got great graffiti. Unless you hang about with me, obviously. So what I'm going to be doing this evening really is talking not just about the graffiti here, but also putting it into a bit of context as well. So we're going to be looking at really why we study graffiti, what it can tell us about the past, what it can tell us in particular about the people who once lived, worked, and worshipped here. And we're also going to be looking at some of the graffiti here and then looking at a few examples from elsewhere to give you an idea of really how special this place is.
Now, if you haven't already wandered around the church and looked at the walls, just look at the piers next to you. This place is absolutely covered in historic. I honestly wouldn't like to even guess the number. We haven't fully catalogued what's going on in this church, but we are talking, hundreds, if not thousands, of individual inscriptions. And these inscriptions go all the way back from the medieval period, all the way through to probably about last year, actually. This is the thing about graffiti. It is ongoing and it is constant. And it is also, it's a conversation. It's a conversation on the wall between the people of this parish and this building. And as you'll see, in some cases, we've got some really quite special inscriptions. Now, if you look at the walls here around me at the moment, believe me, these are absolutely covered in graffiti inscriptions. But they are quite difficult to see in normal circumstances. So what we do is we shine a light obliquely right across the surface. It's called a raking light. And that light highlights, as you can see, any tiny little marking that you will find on the wall. So a surface like this one over here, which looks to you sitting in the pews as fairly plain at the moment, I can assure you that there are dozens of inscriptions there. Now, because we take an archaeological approach to this as well, we're not just looking for medieval inscriptions. We record everything we come across. Essentially, we are there to create a baseline record of what is on the walls. And that means it could be created in the 14th century, or it could have been created on the 14th of February. But we record everything. And as you can see from the image here, this, it completely changes how you view a church. So before I go any further, I want to give you a health warning. Once you start looking for early historic graffiti, you will never stop, okay? You'll find yourself carrying a torch when you go into churches. Once you start, it is highly addictive. And it also changes the way you look at a building, at a fundamental level. You stop looking at the great arches, you stop looking at the magnificent architecture. In some respects, I'm going to ruin churches for you forever, okay? But you start seeing it as a stone-by-stone construction. That is telling you a story. And if you have the patience, if you have the time, and most of all, if you have a torch, you can start to read that story. Now, studying early graffiti really isn't anything new. It has been going on a very, very long time. This is the earliest record I have so far come across to anyone studying historic graffiti, and I will read it to you. This was recorded back in 1335 by Wilhelm von Boldensel, who was a German pilgrim who traveled to Egypt. And while he was there, he noticed on one of the monuments there was a Latin inscription. And being a cleric himself, he was used to reading Latin, so he transcribed it. And it turned out it was a piece of graffiti which had been left over 1,000 years earlier by a Roman visiting that same site. And it reads, "I saw the pyramids without you, my dearest brother, and here I sadly shed tears for you, which is all I could do. And I inscribe this lament in memory of our grief. May thus be clearly visible on the high pyramid the name of Decimus Gentianus, made in about the year 120 by a young lady called Terentia, about her long-lost brother." So this really isn't anything new. What has changed, though, is that finally, after 1,000 years, the technology has caught up with us, and we are now able to record the graffiti. So most of what I'll be showing you this evening has been the results of a lot of surveys that have been taking place over the last decade. These have been largely volunteer-led surveys, citizen science projects. So we've been working with volunteers in Norfolk, Suffolk, and now in many counties all the way across England to record these inscriptions. And they have suddenly been able to go out with the use of cheap digital cameras. And suddenly, as I say, the technology is there that anyone can go out with a torch and a digital camera and they can record inscriptions that previously no one knew about. As I say, it isn't anything new, but we're finally in a position to be able to come to a place like this and not just go, there's some graffiti there, where we can actually record it in detail. Now, these surveys actually began over a decade, the Medieval Graffiti survey. When we began the survey, it was believed that actually graffiti inscriptions in churches were quite rare. That was our first mistake, as it were. And the reason we thought they were quite rare is because when people had gone looking for them previously and written about them, they hadn't really said much. There'd only been one full-length book published on the subject, and that was published back in 1967 by a local lady called Violet Pritchard. She was based in Cambridge. Violet was absolutely brilliant. She, she went around and she recorded a lot of the graffiti in these churches, churches such as Whittlesford. Unfortunately, back then, she had a few limitations. She essentially had to take rubbings of the graffiti to record them, which is not something we recommend today because it can damage the surface of the, particularly the soft stones like these. And it only picks up quite deeply inscribed markings. So if a lot of the graffiti is very light, she simply couldn't record it. She also reputedly didn't have access to her own transport. So the only churches she recorded in were essentially somewhere she could get to on a bicycle from Cambridge or on a cheap day return. So if you read Violet's book, then you would believe that Norfolk, with over 650 medieval churches, only had about 3 or 4 that contained any medieval graffiti. So, but the trouble is, when we started this, we kind of believed her. So we set up this project and we went out looking for medieval graffiti on the understanding that if we were really lucky, we might find a few thousand inscriptions. Well, as soon as we started looking, we realized that the walls of our medieval churches are absolutely covered in inscriptions. This is just examples from 2 sites, Troston in Suffolk on the left there, and Sedgeford in Norfolk. And these are kind of typical of the sites we're coming across. As you can see, we've got a lot of 17th century dates in there, but as I say, we're recording everything. So at a site like Troston, we might have 300, 400, 500 inscriptions. At a church such as Worlington, which is just down the road, we've got over 390 individual inscriptions. By the time we had finished the Norfolk survey, we had recorded over 64,000 individual inscriptions. Most of those had never previously been recorded. As one Oxford professor said to me some years ago, he said, it's a bit like digging up a new Bodleian library in your back garden. And it is. The problem is it was left to a lot of volunteers to deal with that library and really start the process of cataloguing it. So as you can imagine, it is still ongoing. So why study graffiti in the first place? I may have photoshopped this slightly, I think the original said something about being prosecuted. Well, today graffiti is seen as something that is destructive. It's seen as something that's, antisocial. Essentially, graffiti is seen as vandalism. But that is really a very, very modern attitude. Believe it or not, it doesn't start to appear, this idea of graffiti as vandalism, until the middle of the 19th century. Prior to that, just about anyone and everyone appears absolutely okay going out and leaving graffiti inscriptions on our churches, our cathedrals, and our ancient monuments. Now, it seems to coincide, this change in attitude towards historic graffiti appears to coincide with our changing attitudes to those monuments themselves, to those ancient buildings. They stop being seen as just interesting, historical follies, picturesque ruins, and they start being recognized as being buildings that are historically interesting in their own right. It also, oddly enough, coincides with the invention of the word graffiti. Believe it or not, graffiti is an entirely made-up word. And it was made up in the middle of the 19th century by archaeologists, I'm very pleased to say. Archaeologists who invented the term to describe the historic graffiti inscriptions they were then coming across at sites such as Pompeii and Herculaneum. So they made up the word. And when they did use it in this archaeological context, it had no negative connotations whatsoever. It was judgmentally neutral. It was purely descriptive. It's only since 1850 we've all decided graffiti is a bad thing. And graffiti is a bad thing and is not welcome on your house. Unless it's a Banksy, obviously, yeah? In which case we'll all be off to the auction house as soon as you can sneeze. As you understand, there is still a paradox here. It isn't, there is no difference in someone writing their name on a wall today as there is someone writing their name on a wall in 1300 or someone writing on a National Trust property back in 1700. It's exactly the same act. The only thing that changes is our attitude towards it. So hopefully we'll all come to this with an open mind. We also know that people in the past didn't have any problem with graffiti because we have written records that prove it. Now, one of my absolute favourites is this 15th century record of a court case which took place on the Maltese island of Gozo, and I'll read this to you. On the 2nd of September 1486, an accusation was made in front of a vicar on the Maltese island of Gozo against the cleric Andreas de Bisconis by the husband and the father, two separate individuals. I know I'm from Norfolk, but by the husband and the father of local woman Jacobi Salaby. Bisconis, they claimed, had sexually harassed Jacobi Salaby while she was at prayer in the Church of St. James. Now, this court case is fascinating for many reasons. Obviously, first of all, there is the defence put forward by de Bisconis. He claims it's a case of mistaken identity. In the darkness of the church, he didn't think he was addressing Jacobi Salaby, but thought he was addressing a prostitute of his acquaintance. Which makes it perfectly okay then, doesn't it? That's fine, yeah. Unfortunately, witnesses were brought against him. Two witnesses in particular, and they claimed that they had seen graffiti written by Bisconis on the walls of the church in which he detailed exactly what he'd like to do to Jacobi Salaby. Giggle from the front row. It's clear from this court case as well that this is not the only inscription there. There are many inscriptions there. However, they recognised it as being done by de Bisconis because they recognised his handwriting. Now, he was actually found guilty and he spent 2 years in chains as a result of this, I believe. And the judge makes it quite clear that they don't seem to have any issue with the graffiti itself. It was the content of that graffiti which actually put him in chains. So as I say, prior to about 1850, nobody had any problems whatsoever with leaving graffiti on our churches. But what can we actually learn from this historic graffiti? Well, for me, as an archaeologist, that's really, really quite simple, and we're in the perfect building to demonstrate it. If we all look around ourselves at the moment, we've got, the fragments of stained glass, we've got the, memorials on the wall, we've got fantastic effigies and tombs. All of those, as far as I'm concerned, relate to the elite. They relate to the top 5 or 10% of society. Essentially, those who've got the cash to be able to memorialise themselves in one form or other. So where then are the other 95%? Just have a look at that timeline along the back, the wonderful new timeline along the back wall there, and look at the medieval period and realise that actually there are virtually no names there. There are names of vicars, there are names of people who signed documents, but the vast majority of the population of Whittlesford just aren't there. They do turn up, some of these people, in the odd, manor court role, in the odd will, but even then, it's only times when those individuals come into contact with authority. So it isn't really a reflection of those individuals' interactions with the church, as a building or as an institution. So the wonderful thing about the medieval graffiti, of course, is it has the potential to have been created by anyone and everyone. Everyone from the vicar and the lord of the manor. I'll point to your husband for a moment there, just to make him feel good. Yeah. Everyone from the vicar and the lord of the manor, right the way down to the lowliest commoner. I'm not pointing at anyone there. Yeah. And that is what makes it so special. There aren't too many areas of medieval studies where you get that entire cross-section of medieval society on the wall. It really is opening up a new window into the past. So what are we finding? Well, we are finding just about everything you can possibly imagine. We are finding everything from obviously text, religious imagery, unsurprising in a church that. We're finding memorials, we're finding heraldry, we're finding animals, we're finding ships. We are finding just about anything you can possibly imagine from the medieval and post-medieval world, with one exception. We don't find any smut. Sorry to disappoint you there, Steve. I know, dreadful. It's the one area we just don't get any. Well, if you look at modern graffiti, if you look at Roman graffiti, it is all full of sexual imagery. And it's the one thing we do not get when looking in particular at the medieval and immediately post-medieval imagery. It has been suggested that's because we're in a church setting and it isn't really, a suitable subject. However, when we've started looking at vernacular buildings, we're also not getting any of that sexual imagery either. It's simply not appearing amongst the graffiti. And there's a pretty good reason, I suspect, for this being the case, and that is that a large amount of the imagery we're coming across is religious in nature. It is devotional. These are, in some cases, literally prayers on the wall. So a lot of these images, a lot of this stuff we're coming across, these are, what we think of as orthodox imagery. It's the sort of thing that we would find in medieval manuscripts. It's the sort of thing we would find in wall paintings and in stained glass. Some lovely examples here. The one on the left, this is actually from Whittlesford, slightly cut off there by the pulpit. Whittlesford, just there. And that is what we call a holy monogram, IHS, the name of Jesus. We've actually got several examples here. Unfortunately, you can just see from the scale at the top there, this inscription is absolutely minute, and it's like so many of the inscriptions here. We have got big, bold inscriptions, but many of them are absolutely tiny. So they have to be blown up to a very, very large size. The other example there is from Sawston, just up the road. Miserere mei Deus, may God have mercy upon me. This is particularly interesting because it's associated with a name. In that case, I believe it's Wootton. And Wootton turns up amongst the lists of rectors or vicars at Sawston as well. So another case of the vicar leaving their name on the wall. And then from Worlington, just down the road, I'm not sure if you can make that out, what you've actually got there is a hand raised in blessing. This has turned up at several sites across East Anglia. This one is about shoulder height, and it's on the end of the aisle, opposite where you would have one of the side altars. So it's almost as though the graffiti has become interactive, as it were, with its hand raised in blessing. Anyone who's been to Lakenheath, just on the Norfolk-Suffolk border, they will know that it's got a fantastic collection of wall paintings there. And as you walk through the door, you're faced with an image of St. Edmund staring out of the wall at you, and he too has his hand raised in blessing. So the wall painting in that case is blessing everyone as they walk through the door. And we're seeing, a lot of this orthodox imagery. We're also seeing some inscriptions which, frankly, it's difficult to say whether it's graffiti or not. They're so deeply inscribed into the wall. This is from the chapel in Norwich Castle Keep, and we have three figures here. On the left, we have the Virgin Mary. In the centre, unusually, we have Catherine, St. Catherine with her Catherine wheel. And then we have a very, very degraded St. Christopher on the right there. Now, these are so deeply carved, they must have taken many hours, if not days, to produce. They're certainly not part of the formal decoration. There's no sign of pigment. They're certainly not professionally carved. So these sort of sit on a boundary between what we might think of as the formal decoration of the church and our informal graffiti. And this is a very wide boundary, quite blurred as well. So, but again, very orthodox imagery that you'd expect to find in just about every kind of church or religious setting. However, about a third of all the graffiti inscriptions I come across are exactly the same. And these are what are known as apotropaic markings, otherwise known as ritual protection marks, or more correctly perhaps referred to as still are in some of the Baltic states, holy signs. Now, these symbols have their origin, well, many of them have ancient origins, but they're all adopted by the medieval church. And they are really part of that orthodox language of belief in the Middle Ages. And they turn up absolutely everywhere. If you go into a church and it's got any graffiti whatsoever, chances are one of these symbols at least will be present. And they're all over Western Europe and beyond. I can walk into a church in Norfolk and a church in Devon and I'll see exactly the same markings. I can walk into a Norwegian stave church or a church in northern Italy and I'll see exactly the same. These markings turn up everywhere that the medieval church was powerful. Essentially, they were designed or thought of as warding off evil. Apotropaics means simply to ward off. So these are at their most sort of fundamental level, you can think of them as lucky. At a slightly different level, you can think of them as being a symbol of protection, as it were. So they offer some form of protection to the building, to the space, or to the individuals. And they turn up in really quite massive numbers. A few examples here from all over the place. Some of the most common are these compass-drawn designs, but we've got pelter designs, we've got pentangles, we've got the set. And when it comes to these designs, Whittlesford really does have the set. This church probably contains more compass-drawn designs than most other churches I have ever surveyed. There and turn the light on, you think someone has got the spirograph out and had a wonderful couple of weeks, on the wall with their compass. Some of them are fairly traditional, what we'd see here with our 6-petal rosette design. The 6-petal rosette is used from the 12th century onwards, it's used as an alternative to and an occasional replacement for the cross or crucifix. So you'll find it decorating fonts, you'll find it on grave slabs, you'll find it amongst the graffiti, you'll find it amongst the wall paintings. It's just another form of cross, as many of these symbols are. And Whittlesford has them in spades, as you can see. This looks like it should be massive, but the section of wall is about that big. You can all see it later on. And they are all over this wall. This place is absolutely covered in these compass-drawn designs. In some cases, in some churches, you can look at the walls and you'll find concentrations in certain areas. So you'll find these apotropaic marks around areas like the font, or clustered around a side altar. I can't say that in Whittlesford, they're just everywhere. Anyone sitting next to the pier at the back there, just have a quick squint at that pier and you will see it's absolutely covered in compass-drawn designs. As is that one, as is that one, as is that, and it goes on and on and on. I haven't even counted them yet here. Some of them are partial, some of them are fragmented, but they are all over the walls. One of the other most common of these apotropaic markings, and one that we also have an awful lot of examples at Whittlesford, is the pentacle, or the 5-pointed star. Now, today, of course, the pentacle is something that's generally seen as being associated with kind of black magic, with the Wiccan movement, that kind of thing. But again, that is a fairly modern association. I did have one church warden who realized, when he realized he had pentangles all over the wall of his church, he immediately assumed that his church had been taken over by devil worshippers. And because it was a redundant church they were restoring, he actually called in security guards. And then he called in the media, and eventually he called in the territorial army, I believe. When I went to look at them, I said, yeah, you've definitely got people leaving pentangles over the wall, but if you're trying to catch them, you're about 5 centuries too late. So, and Whittlesford, again, we have a fantastic collection here. They are all over these walls. Now, it's one of those symbols which today people might stand back and say, why is my church covered in pentangles? But what you have to remember is this symbol is actually a Christian symbol. And it is one of the earliest and most powerful of Christian symbols. And the reason that is because this is one of the very few of these ritual protection marks, these holy signs, that we actually have a written reference for. And that written reference is the 14th century poem, Gawain and the Green Knight, which I'm sure you've all read in the original Middle English. Steve, you probably have, haven't you? Yeah. There's only one copy of the poem that survives. It was written, we believe, in a Lancashire dialect at some point in the late 14th century. The author is unknown. He is known simply as the Pearl Poet, after another poem that he wrote. And in this, he gives us a breakdown of the symbolism of the pentacle. So for those of you who don't know, Gawain and the Green Knight is a bit of a, it's one of those epic kind of quest stories. And when Gawain is going off on his quest, the author goes into quite a lot of detail. He talks about his horse, he talks about his sword, he talks about his armor, and then he comes to his shield. And he says, Gawain's shield was painted scarlet, and on it was a great gold-painted pentacle. And he says, and now, even though it will interrupt the flow of my story, I will explain the symbolism of the pentacle. And he does. For about 40 lines, and it really does completely interrupt the flow of his story. And he says the pentacle represents the 5 wounds of Christ. It represents the 5 virtues of the knight. It represents the 5 fingers of the hand given by God to do good deeds. And on and on and on. He gives us this complete, wonderful breakdown. So the pentacle essentially is a Christian symbol. And it's only later on that it becomes associated in particular with demons and later on with witchcraft and with devilry. Back when these are being made, they may as well have been leaving a cross on the walls. Oh, and they were doing that too. And Whittlesford really has some absolutely deeply inscribed pentangles. Everywhere you look around here, these are almost as numerous, but not quite as numerous as our compass drawn designs. Anyway, moving on from our ritual protection marks, the one thing that people always expect when we talk about graffiti, of course, is text, writing. People want, if people are writing on the wall, people want to read it. It's about a conversation, as it were. Now, these are actually quite rare, believe it or not. I used to say that text makes up about 5% of all the inscriptions that we record. Having just gone through an awful lot of data over the last few months, I've revised that heavily downwards. Text makes up only a couple of percent of all the inscriptions we come across. These are 3 of my absolute favourites. None of these are actually from here, but I thought I'd include my favourites as well, so you can't have all the fun. The first top left there is from Troston, again, just on the Norfolk-Suffolk border, and it reads Johed or Johannes or John Abthorpe. Now, the wonderful thing about this one, of course, is we can actually tie it in with the documentary evidence, with the written record. The Abthorpe family were lords of the manor of Troston from about 1430 all the way through to about 1490, when the male line finally died out. And a John Abthorpe is witness to a number of wills in the 1450s and 1460s, including one of the Playford wills as well. So we've certainly got the right name in the right place. The text appears also to be good 15th century as well. But can we definitely say that this is the Lord of the Manor leaving his name there on the wall? Well, no, we can't really. Because we are taking an archaeological approach to recording this, we are also taking a very cautious approach towards interpretation. The last bit of the inscription may be missing. It should have read, John Abthorpe is a git. We simply don't know. So the best we can say really is it's the right name in the right place at the right time. We really can't be any more, precise than that. The one on the right there, quite difficult to see, but that's from Great Bardfield down into Essex. And it actually reads Framlingham. In this case, not referring to the market town, but the name of one of the rectors of the rectors of the church there. And what's lovely about this is it's actually been decorated. So it's been, it's been added to and illuminated, much like you would see the capital letters of an illuminated manuscript. So whilst this is the name of the rector, we can also say that this is clearly created by someone who is not only used to the writing arts, but is also seen and is familiar with medieval manuscripts. So chances are it probably is the rector, but as I say, we take his cautious approach. And then on the bottom left is an inscription from Ludham, out in the Norfolk Broads, a bit further afield. You can all read that one? No? Steve? Okay, I'll give you a hint. Sorry, Steve is an old friend, medievalist as well. It's upside down. Wonderful story associated with this one. We were doing a volunteer training session out in Ludham Church, and we could all see about 3 meters up one of the arcades, there was a stone which was covered in graffiti. But it was all very deeply cut, it was all very neat, but we couldn't read it. So we borrowed a ladder, got up there, took photographs, and I'm looking at all this and thought, I studied paleography, I should be able to read this. And it was only when I handed the camera to a friend who turned it round, we realized all the inscriptions on that stone were upside down. And what we think happened is that when they were building the arcade in about 1415, the vicar, the church wardens, and the patrons of the church all had their names and their coats of arms inscribed on this one stone while it was on the ground. It was then given to a stonemason, quite possibly an illiterate stonemason, who placed it upside down in the pier, and it has been there ever since. Now, here we go, lords of the manor, rectors, vicars, church wardens, all leaving their names on the wall. Well, that's not the sort of thing that would happen here, is it? Or is it? Because it certainly was for predecessors. I'm not sure how easily you can make this out. This is an absolutely tiny inscription which is tucked right just round by the screen on the far side. And it actually reads Lockton. Nice medieval script there as well. And if you look over to the far side there, you'll find a list of the rectors here. And we have an Edward Lockton, who is the priest here in 1438. Thanks to the wonderful timeline that I only saw for the first time this afternoon, we've actually got lots of names of other vicars, which don't turn up on this list over here. And there are at least one other name on the walls of the chancel, which is definitely a vicar, and one other possible as well. So hopefully when I've looked at the photographs I took today, we'll be able to tie it in with the timeline even more. So it looks as though it wasn't just Edward Lockton leaving his name on the wall. It appears the vicars do it quite a lot. So keep an eye on it, that's all I'm saying. The text here, we actually have a lot of text inscriptions, far more than we get in our average parish church. Now, we have noticed that actually the closer we get to Cambridge, we do seem to have quite a lot more text. Whether that's because we are seeing close associations between the churches. I know I think there's Jesus College here. Yeah. If you go out to Halton as well, Halton is absolutely covered in text as well, and that's still got very close links with the university. So whether that's a factor, but we are seeing quite a lot of text here. Some of it is absolutely minute. Some I picked up today, which I have. letters which are 5-6 millimeters high. Very, very lightly inscribed. Not all of it, we can tell you exactly what's going on. We have got, these are absolutely tiny inscriptions, and I've no idea what they actually mean. Well, we've got 2 names and 2 figures on there. So the top one reads Sadler, and then we have Roman numeral for 6 next to it. And then the one below it is Simond, and the Roman numeral 5. Now, the Simmons family do turn up in the records for Whittlesford as well, as we will talk about slightly later on. Exactly what they're doing, they're using the walls for some form of, counting or tally, or, it's either that or we've got 2 very odd football teams, But they are using the walls for note-taking almost here. One of the other things which I'm sure many of you will have noticed is that we actually have some really quite deeply inscribed inscriptions here, which, we've got Latin, we've got a lot of deeply inscribed text inscriptions. This one, you've got several names involved. So we've got Richard Slater down at the bottom. I think Lauren has, hi Lauren. Lauren has identified connections between the Slater family and the Turner family, who you can see up there, John Turner up at the top. And then we have our, where are we in there? Then we have our Latin inscription in the center, which I forgot to make a note of. The other one sitting on just on the back pier there, again, John Turner. So turning up twice in the church. And this one may indeed even be some form of informal memorial. So it actually reads, "Virtue liveth after death." So it would seem that this would, it certainly reads like a formal memorial of the period would have done. So the Turner family, as I say, they are an established Whittlesford family. They turn up in a number of the records, as do, we've got several of the other names on the wall here. Now, these informal memorials are really quite common amongst our church graffiti. In a time before, relatively inexpensive gravestones, the only people who were being memorialized were those who could afford nice posh monuments like that, or you might get a wooden cross out in the churchyard. A wooden cross which in 10, 15, 20 years would be gone. So we do find a lot of these inscriptions, a lot of the text inscriptions are in fact memorial inscriptions. We have a lovely example from not too far away over in Hertfordshire, Flamstead in Hertfordshire. This is one of 3 inscriptions that can be found on the wall of the church there. And this dates to the late 16th century. And it reads, "In this middle space, at this seat's end, there lieth buried our neighbour friend, old John Grigg of Cheverell's End, anno 1598, April the 15th. No idea who old John Grigg was, but clearly his neighbours wanted to leave a record of his passing." If you look very closely, you probably won't be able to see from where you're sitting, but they've actually marked out the pier with lines like you would a manuscript before they've actually carved these letters in here as well. So this is sitting on that boundary again between the formal and the informal. All of the inscriptions there at Flamstead appear to be in the same hand as well. So this maybe this is something that's being done by the parish clerk. They're all very, very deeply inscribed as well. This is one of the most obvious things you see when you walk into the church. So this is not something that's being done, hidden away in dark corners. This is being done right, in a very, very public space. So it gets rid of that whole idea about, the naughty choir boys. And it's not just lives they're commemorating on the walls. They're using the walls of our churches to commemorate events as well. One of the most sort of traumatic events, and I thought I'd include these this evening just because they're topical, are visitations of the plague. And after the last 2 years, I thought we could all do a bit of cheering up, talk about, the Black Death. This is probably one of the most famous graffiti inscriptions anywhere in England. It's from Ashwell Church out in Hertfordshire. And it's fascinating because it records not one event, but 2. And it reads, it's in very, very abbreviated and heavily truncated Latin, but it transcribed as, "There was a plague 1,000, 3 times 100, 5 times 10, so 1350. A pitiable, fierce, violent plague departed. A wretched populace survives to witness. And in the end, a mighty wind, Maris, thunders in the year of our world, in the year of the world, 1361. So this is recording the Black Death arriving in Ashwell. But then, after that, they go back 10 years later to record a second event, this mighty storm, which blew down church towers and actually damaged Ashwell Church Tower itself. So it's the walls of the church have become their own chronicle, as it were. So there are some events where they simply want to commemorate these events in something more permanent than parchment, something more permanent than paper. And they turn to the walls of the building that sits at the centre of their village and always has done for 1,000 years. One other plague inscription, because I thought I'd keep it really cheery. This is very unusual because it's written in charcoal. Now, all of the inscriptions we're talking about today are kind of inscribed into the wall. They are the ones that we see, and they are the ones that survive. But what you have to remember is that the walls, particularly these outside walls, would also probably be covered in graffiti as well. And some of that would be in charcoal, some of it would be in wax crayon, some of it would be inscribed. But all of those inscriptions have now gone. So when we're looking at the graffiti in the church, such as this, we are only ever seeing a fragment, believe it or not, of what was once there. We're only ever seeing a one-sided conversation. This is quite remarkable because it is a charcoal inscription, and it was uncovered some decades ago while they were doing renovation. And it also appears to relate to another pestilence or pandemic, keeping it on topic there. O lamentable death, how many dost thou cast into the pit? Anon the infants fade away, and of the aged death makes an end. Now these, now those thou ravagest. O death on every side, those that wear horns or veils, fate spareth not. Therefore, while in the world the brute beast plague rages hour by hour, with prayer and with remembrance, deplore death's deadliness. Enough of the plague for the time being. Shall we move on? The thing about text inscriptions, believe it or not, is despite the fact they probably only make up about 2% of all of the graffiti we come across, we still can't read a lot of them. Now, there are several reasons for that. That probably is the most frustrating thing about any of the graffiti study, is the fact that someone has taken the trouble to write on the wall and you can't read it. If someone writes, it was meant to be read. It's just the ultimate frustration. Now, there are several reasons for that. Sometimes it's because the inscription is simply too degraded. This is actually an example of late medieval text from here in Whittlesford as well. And anyone wants to have a crack at reading this, please do. The letters are, again, about 6 or 7 millimeters high, and it has been badly abraded. You'll see also these vertical lines running across the surface. That's where this pier has actually been cleaned back as well. So they're the marks from a mason's comb. So we have got evidence here that there was wall painting, there was much more pigment on the walls, there was layers of lime wash. All that's been scraped back, and it has taken some of the graffiti with it. One of the other reasons, of course, is that a lot of these are in Latin. And this is not the sort of Latin that you learned at school. Trust me. This is what we call clerical Latin, or more commonly, dog Latin. It's full of abbreviations, it's full of contractions, and sometimes is, you're writing on straight, sometimes they also, to save time, start contracting the words completely. So the last minim downline of one letter is the first of the next. So the whole thing gets contracted down, and it's impossible. So probably about half of the inscriptions that we come across, the text inscriptions, we simply can't read. As Dr. John Alban, the former county archivist for Norfolk, said, He said, reading the writing on the wall is very, very different from reading it in a manuscript. And he said some of these inscriptions are so heavily contracted that the only person who could possibly read them is the person who wrote them in the first place. So text. What else are we finding on the walls? Well, people, faces. There is a bit of a joke amongst the graffiti hunters that if you stare at the walls for long enough, you'll soon find them staring back. And it really isn't too far from the truth. This is a couple of lovely examples we've got here. The one on the left is from Skull on the Norfolk-Suffolk border, and it's meant to, or according to local tradition, it's meant to depict a bishop, not a terribly flattering view of a bishop. Or as one of the kids there said, it looks like a Viking whose horns have dropped off his helmet. So I'm not even going there as an archaeologist. And on the right, of course, something you should all be very, very familiar with, the Whittlesford Archer. We were discussing this earlier. This is probably one of the best known inscriptions that we have anywhere in this church. It's also the one that can probably tell us least. It's very lovely. Don't misunderstand me. It's in a parish where Roger Ascham, the author of the book on the longbow, lived. But it can actually tell us very, very little. What we can, it's not particularly a devotional image. It does just appear to be a picture of a guy with a longbow. It is probably medieval. That's about all we can say on that one, I'm afraid. The other stuff you've got here, though, is far, far more interesting. This little chap, you've probably all walked past, is actually on the door surround. Just as you go into the new build section. And he appears to be, we've got the initials there, which is actually, it's JS. This may be a name, a monogram for a name. It could well be a monogram for the name Jesus as well, which is something we've been looking at recently. But the figure himself, we've just got this head shown in profile, and he's very clearly wearing a hood. And it appears to be, a 15th century Burgundian style hood as well. So it could creep back into the 14th, but as we know, that door surround wasn't built then. I'm sticking with probably 15th century on this one as well. And the place is covered in faces. Again, I haven't counted, but we've got dozens of little people all over the walls. As you sit here, they're all staring at you, wondering what you're doing here, right? Because, they've been here a long time. Now, with faces, this is a particularly lovely example from Norwich Castle again. And it's a woman, it's the face of a woman wearing a butterfly headdress from probably the late 14th century. Now, important image, this one. You notice the discoloration on her face, yeah, compared to all the stone surrounding. Well, this particular graffiti is again located about shoulder height, and it is just inside one of the old entrances to the castle keep. And above it is a window, and it shines a natural raking light right across the surface. So for hundreds of years, people have walked into Norwich Castle Keep, looked around, and seen this face staring out of the wall at them, and they've all gone like that. And this discoloration is caused by the oils in our fingertips over hundreds of years. This poor woman has been mauled for centuries. So the one rule, if you are going to go looking for graffiti around here, and I certainly suggest you do, is we look, but we don't touch. Otherwise, they all end up looking like this poor woman from Norwich Castle. Alongside the people, of course, animals. Lots and lots of animals. We've got an interesting collection of birds here in Whittlesford. I haven't seen anything else in particular. We've got, a possible couple of deer. They look as though they could also be dogs. They really aren't terribly well defined. But we have got some strange sort of wading birds, possibly with a fen connection going on there across the walls. What's interesting is the animals we are coming across, but also the animals we aren't. So we're coming across the deer. We're coming across the hawks. We're coming across the running hounds, the animals of the hunt. What we're not coming across are the everyday animals of the medieval farmyard. We're not coming across the cattle, and we're not coming across the pigs. Well, there's one in Suffolk. And we're not coming across the sheep. sheep, this is East Anglia. Half of these churches are built with profits from the wool trade, and yet we have yet to find a single sheep. So animals in the farmyard, they simply don't turn up, which again suggests that maybe there is a votive function to a lot of these inscriptions. Maybe, in fact, these are asking for good luck in that kind of thing. Sometimes what's not on the walls is perhaps just as important as what is on the walls. Other things, of course, heraldry. Lots and lots of heraldry, and this is certainly where Whittlesford does not let us down. The two inscriptions on the left there are both from this church, and I challenge you to find them. I have seen, okay, yeah, you found one. There are at least a dozen heraldic shields around here. Most of them are quite crude. It would be very, very difficult with these to identify them and link them to specific families, because they are almost like generic heraldry, faux heraldry, it has been termed. Even with really nice examples, though, such as the one at the top right there, again from Troston, it is very, very difficult to tie these down to individual people or families. And the simple reason for that is colour, pigment. Medieval heraldry relies on colour, and it's the one thing that we don't get, apart from the occasional bit of green slime, we don't get in the graffiti inscriptions. This example down here is one of over 30 examples that we recently looked at Worlington Church as well, just down the road. So it does seem as though we've got a real concentration in this area. Again, perhaps that's linking through to close links with the university. Yeah, difficult to say at this time. Sometimes if you're really, really, really lucky, you don't just get the shield, but you actually get the full heraldic crest. Now, these are really, really quite rare. This is from Anstey in Hertfordshire. And here you can see you've actually got the helm with the big heraldic crest on top, and we have other graffiti around it. These are incredibly rare. So, you get really excited when you find that. You've got 4 here. Really, really, very, very impressive. You can see we've got, well, partially, we've got one example here and another one, partial one up at the top, where we actually have a full helmet with a crest, and it actually appears to have a deer or an antelope's head on the top. They're all associated with the name Allerton. So I quickly went and was looking at the timeline, looking at the church guides, looking at local records, trying to link to the Allerton family. I didn't look that hard, but I haven't found anything yet. But it does appear that, Allerton, these do appear to be associated with the name Allerton. I say these are incredibly rare, and you've got 4 examples sitting up there in the chancel. Okay, they are all the same, so it's not that good, but, still pretty good, I think. Other things we come across, of course, music. This is one of the rarest types of historical graffiti we ever come across, musical notation. Most of our musical notation is associated with our larger sites, with our cathedrals, with our abbeys, that kind of thing. The reason for that, of course, is it's at those larger sites that musical notation is actually formally taught. At a parish level, music was still incredibly important, but it was very much taught more one-to-one, and much less of the formal notation. So I'm afraid to say you haven't got any of that here. No musical notation. They just put the instruments on the wall. So here we've got musical instruments. This, you can see we've got part of a pelter design there, but you can clearly see we've got a harp. And this is one of at least 2 harp inscriptions here. And another thing that may be some form of instrument, which I picked up earlier as well. So in the case of Whittlesford, they're actually just putting the musical instruments on the wall. Now, if we're really lucky, we do sometimes also come across the work of the masons, the people who actually built these amazing churches. This is an inscription from Weston Longville, just outside Norwich, and it's one of 3 architectural inscriptions to be found on the walls there. The medieval mason tended to take a fairly laid-back, pragmatic approach to building. Why carry a big drawing board around you when you've got nice big flat surfaces like that, or the back of that screen, or the back of that pew? So we find there architectural inscriptions all over the place. When we began the survey, there were only less than 24 of these type of inscriptions known anywhere in England. In the last decade, we have more than doubled that number. So these architectural inscriptions are incredibly interesting and important. And yes, you've got one on the walls here as well. So this again is down into the chancel. It's an unusual one. Violet Pritchard recorded this back in the 1950s. It was also recorded by Colton sometime back in the 1930s as well. It's an unusual one because it's clearly meant to depict window tracery. But it doesn't appear to be that formal. It's almost like a working schematic. It's not a final design. It's almost someone going on the wall and saying, "Oi, what about this?" And then when you actually look around and try and match it exactly to a window here, well, we've got a fine candidate there at the East End. It does seem to be related to, but not exactly the same. So these inscriptions are incredibly rare, and you've got a lot of them here. And that makes it an incredibly important church. However, there is one inscription here that I, even after 10 years, got really, really excited about. And believe it or not, it's this one. This was first recorded by a historian, an archaeologist by the name of Colton, who did a lot of work on graffiti in the Cambridge area back in the early 20th century. And he recognized it was interesting, but he got the date wrong. He read that date as reading 1388, when in fact it reads 1588. Now, 1388 would have been particularly interesting because, first of all, we weren't really using Arabic numerals much in England at the time. The arcade that it's sitting on wasn't built, so it was a bit of a giveaway. So this is actually a late 16th century inscription. And it reads, off to the left is now partially obscured by the screen, but you can see it's difficult to photograph. Frater Fens Apostate. Frater obviously being brother, and if this might be Fens or it might be Fines, we're not sure on the actual surname, and again, we've been trying to tie it in to the village record here. But it clearly says apostate. Now, this inscription, this late 16th century Tudor inscription, may well relate to an unusual heretical sect that was operating in this area of Cambridgeshire in the late 16th century. It's not something that you will probably have heard of unless you happen to be sitting in sort of academia at Cambridge, because until the last 20 years, virtually no work had been done on this secretive sect. It is a group of Anabaptists who are known as the Family of Love. The Family of Love is very unusual. Not a lot is known about them because they were so secretive. It begins as a kind of Anabaptist cult, I suppose, in Germany in the 1540s. There is a spin-off of, Protestantism is suddenly appearing and shooting off in all directions. And this, the Family of Love is just one small group of these. They held their meetings in secret, and they believed it was acceptable to outwardly conform. That meant that they were, unlike many other, Christian sects and cults, they were quite happy to turn up at church and pretend it was all okay. They also believed the government should have no interest and no influence upon their personal belief. It was about them. So in that respect, this Family of Love were kind of early Puritans in that respect. Some commonly held beliefs included that all things come from nature. The gifts of earth came from God's bounty or nature, so everything should be shared as communal property. So they're proto-communist as well. Or everything belongs to everyone in common. Now that also, according to some critics, meant relationships, love, and sex as well. So they were dismissively referred to as the family of lust. Some critics of the period alleged that familists, as they were known, practiced adultery and wife swapping. How is the village today? You know? There is little independent authority for these assertions, though, which were probably used to try and discredit this sect. Now, the villages, this wasn't a widespread cult. It turned up in London, it turned up in a few odd places in the southeast. There was one area in the country, though, that it really did get a hold. And it is this small collection of villages just to the south of Cambridge. And they were sort of well-known cult centres in the 1570s and 1580s. In particular, where I was earlier, at Bolsham Church. Now you can see you've got Bolsham there. Bolsham is a major centre for the family of love. All these places with my hearts are places where the family of love were known to operate. And then the arrow points right down to where we were. You know, location is making this look really quite suspicious, shall we say. The family of love referred to each other as brother and sister, Frater. And they would have been seen in the eyes of anyone else as apostates. So does this inscription relate to this heretical sect? And I say heretical because they were declared heretics in the 1580s. The government, the Elizabethan government, they were fairly ambivalent to this sect to begin with. But then they realized that actually they were everything that was going to be a threat to them. They didn't believe in private property. They didn't believe in traditional relationships. They didn't believe in traditional authority. They didn't believe that the government should have a say in matters of belief. They also didn't mind breaking an oath. They didn't mind keeping everything secret, and they held their meetings in secret. You can imagine in the lead up to the Spanish Armada, when Elizabeth is under threat and England is falling into chaos, underground cult like this was seen as a direct threat to government. In the 1580s, the government finally acted and they outlawed them. There were mass arrests in this area. People were taken to court. Unfortunately, we don't have the full court record, so we don't have all their names. But the family of love is one of the strangest and least known of these. And it certainly appears likely that that inscription is, well, there is certain evidence to point towards it being related to the family of love. It's the right date, it's the right place, it's referring to themselves as brother and as apostate. So maybe actually, Vicar, what you've got on the walls here is the result of a 16th century heretic. Every church should have a heretic. Anyway, coming to an end now. What you have to remember is that the study of all these graffiti inscriptions is an evolving archive. As we go back and look at churches again, as the technology improves, we are seeing different things. I've seen new things here today than I have in my previous 2 visits to Whittlesford. I've come across at least a dozen new examples today. There is always new stuff emerging from behind limewash, as when this doorway was uncovered and you discovered all these wonderful new inscriptions around there. It is an emerging and growing archive. It's not always evolving in quite the way we would like it, though. You have to remember that churches are also subject to change, and in this day and age, they are subject to, in need of repairs, and every church is constantly fundraising to keep these amazing, 500, 600, 700-year-old buildings upright. This is an example from Troston again. The picture on the left is as we surveyed it in 2010, and that on the right as we surveyed the same piece of graffiti in 2019. So it really is, in many cases, the recording has just come of age as the technology has come of age, but it still is, in many cases, a race against time. And occasionally, of course, we do then get the occasional disaster. This was February this year. Beecham Well Church in Norfolk went up in flames. taking with it one of my favourite pieces of medieval graffiti. This is the Beecham Well demon. And we do find an awful lot of demons carved into the walls of our medieval church. We think he's probably lost now, although they're still sort of working on the church. So it is a race against time. Now, lastly, how is the study of all the graffiti at places like this, how is it changing the way we think about medieval society? How is it changing the way we think about how people interacted with their churches? How is it changing the way we think about the people of the past? Well, fairly straightforward. And to do that, I have to show you the one type of graffiti that I haven't discovered so far at Wicklesford. And that would be ship graffiti, one of my favourite types of graffiti. This is an example, is from Wiverton up on the North Norfolk coast. Now, many of the inscriptions that I have shown you this evening are what we call reworked images. And by that, I mean we have added in these black lines. And we've added in those black lines so that you can see them nice and clearly on the PowerPoint here. So many of these inscriptions, I said at the start, are really, really difficult to see. Without the use of our raking light right across the surface, you simply don't notice they're there. And that, firstly, may well be the reason that many of them have survived quite so well as they have. You simply walk past them. You've all walked past hundreds of these inscriptions and not noticed they're there. However, that wasn't the case when many of these inscriptions were first made. And the reason for that is, of course, paint and pigment. And we're in the perfect church, of course, to demonstrate that. During the Middle Ages, almost every church, without exception, was covered in wall paintings. You had your doom paintings high above your chancel arch. You had decorative paintings of the saints processing along the colonnade. But even the lower parts of the church would also be covered in pigment. This is St. Telo's Church at the Welsh National Folk Museum. They moved the church there stone by stone, and when they rebuilt it, they decided that they would decorate it as they thought a medieval church would have looked. Those who know their wall paintings will actually recognise where they've copied some of these from. I think St. Christopher is from Slapton in Northamptonshire. Now, it's very, very different from the plain whitewashed church that we're used to today. However, in my opinion, they haven't gone far enough. And that's because they've left these areas actually plain white. And what the archaeology is telling us is that those areas are also painted. But they're not painted with images of saints or St. George. They're actually painted a plain pigment. So if you go to places like Western Longville, which has an incredible damp problem, you can actually see all these layers of pigment peeling back off the walls. And there's red ochres, there's orange ochres, there's fictive blues, there's black. And it's into these areas, all around the walls, that the graffiti is cut. And the graffiti would originally have been cut through this pigment to reveal the pale stone beneath. So far from being hidden away in dark corners, far from being something that you have to use a special light to see, these inscriptions would have been one of the most obvious things you saw when you walked into the medieval church. Forget the stained glass, forget the alabaster monuments, forget the brasses on the floor. Everywhere you look around you, you would be faced with masses of these little white inscriptions. And that tells me the last important thing we need to understand about these medieval graffiti inscriptions. If these had been looked upon as being vandalism, if these had been looked upon as being destructive, then at any point, the vicar, her husband, or any of the church wardens could have simply wiped them from the wall. The fact they are still here today is testament that they didn't. These were not things that were being created in dark corners. These are not being created by your naughty choir boys. These are being created by the people of Whittlesford. These are being created by the vicar, by the churchwarden, by the lord of the manor, for everyone to see. These are as much a part of the medieval church as the Mass. Apologies, vicar. Anyway, thank you for listening. And if you would like to know any more about medieval graffiti, if you haven't had enough yet, take a look at the website, medieval-graffiti.co.uk, or for late night ramblings, you can follow me on Twitter at medievalg. Anyway, thank you for listening.
So I think that's been a real privilege. I don't know what you think. It's a real privilege to have someone come and speak with such authority and sense of humour. But to tell us something so new about a place that we know so well. It's quite extraordinary. My idea of this church has been completely blown out of the water.
Sorry.
The idea that there are all these faces, all these scratches of devotional swirls and pentagons is just extraordinary. And I was just looking at that column as you were speaking, and all this stuff is coming out of me. So you have completely opened my eyes, you've completely revolutionised my idea of this church, and I suspect that's true for a lot of the people here. So thank you very much.
Absolute pleasure.
And now what I'm going to suggest is if we have any burning questions, we'll do it like that. Then I'm going to suggest we allow people to wander around and have a look and maybe come and talk to you.
Yep.
And then we will let you go. Any questions as we are now? Yes.
Do we get the opportunity to add to the food?
Well, first of all, you won't need the chisel because we're in Cambridgeshire, so we've got a lot of really soft stones, so an eating knife would do nicely if you've got one of those handy. That isn't generally the idea. Many of the National Trust sites I've been working on recently, because it's been renovations and restorations, we have encouraged the builders to leave graffiti. Only on the new material that they're adding in. But the historical graffiti was so incredibly informative in terms of building history. So when was it last repointed? When were they putting up the gutters? When was this bit built? That we encourage all the modern builders to do it as well. And I do know some churches where they have actually had put graffiti walls in. So, and there was one that did it a couple of years ago, got all the kids to come in. And it was all the year who were leaving at school, and they had to build a special new part of the church, and they had this block, and they got them all to write their names in pencil, and then they got a guy to come and engrave them all in afterwards. So. Yeah. Well, when they built Guildford Cathedral back in the 20th century, middle 20th century, everyone, it was done by subscription. Everyone bought a brick, and you got to sign your brick. So I'm on the DAC for Guildford Cathedral, so I go around with a UV light picking out people's names, written in the 1940s there as well. So it's an ongoing story. Well, if I start shining light, if I shine the light along across like that, if I come over to a pier where the vicar is, so you can see a bit better. Sorry for the live stream. Yeah. So you shine it right across, and suddenly you've got all these marks start to appear, and they're all over the place, right? And the more oblique you make the light, the more you see. So there's a part of a shield up there, absolutely all over the place. So yeah, take a torch.
Last question, as we are right.
Building carry compasses around, and how do they make the geometric marks?
Yeah, good one, that, isn't it? A lot of them, the smaller ones, we've got a pretty good answer to, because compasses, there weren't a lot of compasses, you're quite right. In the archaeological record, compasses are really quite rare. If you go and look for compasses from the Museum of London excavations through the 70s and 80s, where they found thousands of artifacts, yeah, they found one pair of compasses. So here we have one of the most common types of graffiti, which is being made with a tool which is really rare. So what are we doing? We're passing it from village to village, or, you know. So a lot of the compass drawn designs tend to be quite small. You'll see on that back pier, if you go around the back of there, you'll see some average size ones. We think we've identified the tool now that's actually used to create those. And they aren't compasses at all, or dividers. They are, in fact, shears, those little snips, yeah? Really common, one of the most common metal finds you'll get in sort of an urban environment, often carried by women. You'll see them carried sort of hung from a belt on a chatelaine. You'll also see them intriguingly in manuscripts hung up by the fireplace, and the fireplace, of course, is where we're finding a lot of these compass drawn designs. A guy recently did some work at Cambridge University where he was looking at these compass drawn designs kind of with a microscope, and realised that actually you can identify which ones are done with shears and which are done with a pair of compasses, because the central hole is very, very different. So a lot of these smaller ones are probably being done with these shears. And that then leads to questions of things like gender bias. Are they being created by women? Because we find concentrations of these around the font. So are we seeing this as a female act of piety, a female act of devotion? Unfortunately, a lot of the ones here are a lot bigger. So the only thing they can probably be made with is actually a set of compasses, which does then raise questions, particularly around the corner here on this one pier. Is this a mason? Are they playing about? Are they setting something out? Or does someone in Whittleswood own compasses? You know, bearing in mind, again, close connection with the university, quite possible. She's the Vicky, you can't stop her.
Well, I'm firstly really grateful that 3 years ago I came into the church and found this strange man with a bright light at the pillars, and had no idea what he was up to. I thought maybe we were looking to steal something, but I'm so delighted we discovered you, so thank you for 3 years on the cover. But you said to me that we are nearly 9 out of 10 in terms of churches. What makes Whittleswood so special? Is it the way we start our building? Why are we...
I think it's, in terms of the graffiti, it's a 9, right? Simply because it's such diverse and good quality graffiti. There's a lot of it, right? But you go into church, I went to Balsham today, and Balsham is full of graffiti, but it's all kind of pretty, there's no real standout pieces
Not
there.
as good as ours.
No. And, you know, you've got Duxford up the road, which has got wonderful graffiti, right? But this whole area has got some really good churches. Duxford's got some great graffiti. Sawston's got some great graffiti as well. Whittleswood stands out, I think, because you've got the quantity of diversity. So that's the same with heraldic. You know, finding a heraldic crest is unusual. You know, it really is. It stands out. 4 is just showing off. And it's the same with some of the other stuff. There's a lot of very good text here. There's a lot of very minute text here as well. The compass drawn is insane. I don't know what's going on with that at the moment. And also you've got wonderful things like the architectural inscriptions. And if that 16th century inscription, if it is related into the family of love, yeah, that's really important. Of course.
So I'm going to draw the formal conclusions to an end. I'm going to just make a couple of announcements and finish off. So do hang around for a few minutes. I'm going to kick everyone out before my bedtime. Do enjoy all the exhibition. There's a real treasure trove here. In particular, can I point out that timeline which just arrived today? Thank you very much. And Lionel, mainly that. Extraordinary achievement. Another amazing achievement is that the latest publication of the latest edition of the history of our church, with a new supplement at the back of our wall grade. A snip tonight at £3.50. But for our visiting speaker, this is a complimentary copy. I tell you, we don't give away free stuff, you know. So here's it for you, and there'll be something to drink on the way out. But I think we're really grateful to see you. We invite you back. Please come and explore our community. Please come and experience it. Every time I'm in church, I'm like, thank you.